When Carlos drifted away from the group during the forest exploration, he walked apprehensively, with a strange feeling. But despite the discomfort, he sought the best photograph he had waited the whole trip to take. It was when during his walk, a large and imposing gorilla stood in front of him. When Carlos saw it, he thought, "My God, how magnificent. But should I take this picture? What this wild animal can do is unpredictable," he thought. Contrary to the warnings of the local guides who told him not to take any pictures directly of an animal, with trembling and sweating hands, he slowly raised the camera to capture this rare moment. But when he pressed the camera button and the flash went off, what the gorilla did left everyone pale. In the dimness of his studio, surrounded by stacks of books on African wildlife and faded maps, Carlos meticulously adjusted the photographic equipment he would take on his journey. Cameras, lenses, spare batteries, each item was a silent promise of future adventures. "This is the moment I've waited for all my life," he murmured to himself, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of capturing the majesty of the wild with his lens. His friend Anna, who was sitting in a corner of the studio, watched him with a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this, Carlos? Africa isn't exactly a walk in the park, and the gorillas, they can be unpredictable." Carlos looked up from his camera and smiled, a smile that couldn't quite conceal the underlying nervousness. "I know, Anna, but that's exactly why I need to do this. These creatures, they're magnificent. Seeing them up close, in their natural habitat, is a dream I need to fulfill." "And what about the dangers?" Anna persisted, crossing her arms, her somber expression lit only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. "We've heard stories. Tourists getting lost, encounters gone wrong." Carlos set the camera down on the table carefully and walked over to Anna, gripping her shoulders with a reassuring firmness. "I'll be with the best guides. Besides, I need these photos, Anna. This project could be the big break in my career as a nature photographer. I can't let fear hold me back." Anna looked into his eyes, searching for signs of hesitation, but found only a burning determination. "Then promise me you'll be careful," she said, finally relenting. "I promise," Carlos assured her with a confidence he almost believed to be true. In the days that followed, Carlos threw himself into preparation with an almost feverish obsession. He checked his equipment list repeatedly, studied maps, and read accounts from other travelers. The night before departure, he barely slept, his mind spinning with possible scenarios, both wonderful and terrifying. Finally, on the morning of the journey, with his bags packed and his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension, Carlos bid farewell to Anna. "Take care of everything here while I'm gone," he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Anna hugged him tight, whispering in his ear, "Come back whole, you hear me? Don't make me come after you." With one last wave, Carlos got into the taxi that would take him to the airport, casting one more glance at the gray sky, as if searching for a sign. As the car pulled away, he allowed himself a shy smile. The adventure awaited, with all its promises and dangers, and he was ready to face it. After hours of flying, crossing skies and continents, Carlos finally landed on African soil. The hot, humid air enveloped him like a cloak as he stepped out of the airport terminal, and an earthy smell, laden with promises of adventure, filled his nostrils. He breathed deeply, allowing himself to fully absorb the atmosphere. In the arrivals terminal, a man with dark skin and a welcoming smile held a sign with his name. "Mr. Carlos, I'm Joseph, your guide for the expedition in the national park." Joseph's voice was as warm as his smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Joseph. I'm looking forward to our journey," Carlos replied, shaking the guide's hand enthusiastically. As they drove to the park, Joseph explained the routine they would follow and the necessary precautions. "Gorillas are extraordinary creatures, Mr. Carlos, but they're also immensely powerful and deserve our respect. Following the rules is essential for everyone's safety." Carlos listened attentively, his eyes capturing the landscapes passing by the vehicle's window. Endless greens, picturesque villages, and occasionally wild animals that sparked his photographic fascination. Upon arriving at the park, They were greeted by a team of conservationists, each with a palpable passion for nature and its preservation. Carlos felt small among them, humble but extremely privileged to be there. After settling into a rustic cabin, he joined Joseph and other tourists for the first reconnaissance walk. The ground beneath his feet was soft, littered with fallen leaves, and each step seemed to sink into centuries of natural history. Here, every sound, every movement has meaning, Joseph murmured as he guided the group along a narrow trail. Carlos had his camera ready, his heart pounding with anticipation at each new turn in the path. When they spotted the first group of animals, a family of carefree baboons playing among the trees, Carlos felt a shiver of excitement. He raised the camera, adjusting the focus with slightly trembling hands. The click of the camera sounded almost reverent in the silence of the forest. As the day progressed, they spotted several other animals, graceful antelopes, a solitary buffalo, and birds of vibrant colors that defied any artist's palette. Each encounter was a treasure, each captured image a personal victory for Carlos. However, Carlos's true quest was yet to come. The gorillas, the magnificent primates that had dominated his dreams and planning, were still hidden in the shadows of the forest, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Returning to the cabin at dusk, Carlos felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. He knew that the true test of his journey was just beginning. The next morning, Carlos's excitement was palpable. Today would be the day he would finally venture deeper into the forest, into the area known to be the habitat of the gorillas. He equipped himself carefully, checking each item twice, his camera hanging around his neck like a talisman. After a quick breakfast, the group gathered for a brief safety briefing. Joseph reiterated the rules, his tone more serious than ever. "Stay together and follow my instructions. Gorillas are incredible beings, but they are still wild animals." As they advanced through the dense vegetation, the sound of their own muffled footsteps on the thick moss and fallen leaves, Carlos felt the moisture of the air seeping into his lungs. The jungle around them was a labyrinth of shadows and sounds, each bush and tree seeming to guard ancient secrets. Not long after they began their walk, an uncomfortable urgency began to grow in Carlos. He needed to get away from the group, but hesitated to speak up. Joseph's words echoed in his mind, warning about the dangers of straying too far. Finally, the need became too much. He approached Joseph and whispered, "I need to step away for a bit. It's an emergency." Joseph looked at him with a concerned expression. "Don't go far, and please be quick. I'll assign 2 of our assistants to keep an eye on you." Carlos thanked him and, guided by one of the assistants, stepped away from the main path. Carlos's heart raced not only from the physical need, but also from the fear of the unknown that the jungle represented. Finding a relatively secluded spot, Carlos hurried to relieve his urgency. However, the silence of the forest was oppressive, laden with an expectation that made his skin crawl. He tried to focus only on the urgency, but his senses were on high alert, every small noise making him flinch. When he finished, he felt relieved, but the sense of isolation grew exponentially. The assistant who had accompanied him kept a respectful distance, but Carlos knew he was alone, vulnerable. The forest seemed to close in around him, and every shadow seemed to hide an observer. Returning to the path, Carlos tried to maintain composure, but the weight of loneliness in that brief moment had left its mark. He didn't realize it, but he had strayed a little farther than he should have. The assistant called him back, his voice a reminder of the thin line between adventure and danger. Rejoining the group, Carlos tried to hide his restlessness, but his eyes were constantly moving, searching among the trees for any shape or movement. He knew that the real journey was just beginning, and that the true encounter with the gorillas could bring both wonder and fear. The hike continued, with Carlos now aware of every step he took, the experience of isolation still fresh in his mind, adding a layer of suspense to what was to come. The jungle became denser as they advanced, and the group entered a secluded region of the park, known for its population of gorillas. Carlos, though still somewhat shaken by the previous experience, was determined not to miss a moment. His camera was ready, his gaze alert to any movement among the leaves. Joseph signaled for the group to slow down and speak softly. The tension among the tourists was palpable. Everyone knew they were entering gorilla territory. Carlos gripped his camera tightly, his heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears with anticipation and anxiety. Suddenly, Joseph froze and raised his hand for everyone to stop. Total silence fell upon the group. Only the soft sound of nervous breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves could be heard. Carlos adjusted the focus of his camera, his breathing slowing down as he tried to stay calm and ready. It was then that it happened. A large male gorilla emerged slowly from behind a big tree just a few meters ahead. His stature was imposing, and his eyes watched the group with a cautious curiosity that sent shivers down Carlos's spine. Joseph whispered instructions to remain calm and not make any sudden movements. Carlos, with the camera in his hands, felt torn between fear and fascination. He had never been so close to such a powerful and majestic creature. With trembling hands, he began taking photos, each click capturing the pensive expression of the gorilla, the details of his thick fur, and the smooth movements with which he observed the intruders in his home. The gorilla took a step forward, eyes fixed on Carlos. Carlos's heart raced, and for a moment he feared the animal might attack. But instead, the gorilla simply sat down, still maintaining a safe distance. There seemed to be a kind of tacit understanding, a momentary truce between man and animal. Carlos slowly lowered the camera, allowing himself to look directly into the gorilla's eyes without the barrier of the lens. There was intelligence there, a glimmer of recognition that made Carlos wonder how much we really know about these complex beings. Joseph, sensing the silent connection forming, whispered to Carlos, "It's rare for them to show such calmness. You're lucky, Carlos." The encounter lasted only a few more minutes, but for Carlos it felt like an eternity. He captured every moment, every detail, knowing that these images would be the most precious in his collection. Finally, the gorilla rose slowly and, with one last glance at Carlos, retreated back into the forest, disappearing among the trees like a ghost. The group remained silent for a while after the gorilla left, each person processing the experience in their own way. Carlos felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. He knew that the photos he took today told more than just the story of an encounter. They spoke of respect, admiration, and the eternal struggle for coexistence between man and wild nature. The group continued their journey through the park, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a feeling of silent respect among the members, all deeply affected by the encounter with the gorilla. Carlos, in particular, was introspective, reviewing the captured images on his camera, each photo bringing back the gorilla's penetrating gaze. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and red, the group decided to camp at a site designated by the park. As they set up the tents, Carlos felt restless, the image of the gorilla still etched in his mind. He decided to wander away from the campsite for a while to reflect and, perhaps, capture some photos of the sunset. As he walked alone, lost in his thoughts, Carlos didn't realize that he had strayed farther than intended. The sound of breaking branches brought him back to reality. He froze, his heart beating fast. Slowly, he turned to the source of the sound, and there it was, just a few meters away, the same gorilla they had encountered earlier. This time, however, the meeting was different. There were no barriers between them, no group watching. It was just Carlos and the gorilla, alone in the twilight of the forest. Carlos felt a mix of fear and fascination, but something in the gorilla's gaze was reassuring. There seemed to be a shared curiosity, a mutual recognition of their presences. Inspired by a brave impulse, Carlos slowly knelt down and placed his camera on the ground, showing the gorilla that he had no aggressive intentions. The gorilla watched him, his heavy breathing blending with the gentle sounds of the forest at dusk. For a long moment, they both remained still, just observing each other. Then, surprisingly, the gorilla approached, his movements large yet incredibly gentle. He stopped at a safe distance, his expression curious and calm. Carlos, though trembling, felt a wave of calmness. Remembering the stories Joseph had told about gorillas occasionally showing interest in strange objects, Carlos slowly picked up his camera and took a photo of the sunset, then turned the screen to show the gorilla. The gorilla tilted its head, looking at the image on the screen. Its eyes, reflecting the twilight light, showed surprising depth. Carlos dared to speak, his voice low and soft. "Look, it's the world as I see it." Seeming to understand, the gorilla emitted a low grunt, its expression softening even more. It sat down, still maintaining a respectful distance. Encouraged, Carlos took a few more photos, each one followed by showing them to the gorilla, who seemed genuinely interested. The connection between man and animal at that moment was transcendental. Carlos felt that he was not only capturing images, but sharing an experience, communicating across species barriers. They remained like this, sharing the sunset until night began to fall. Reluctantly, Carlos stood up, waving gently to the gorilla. "Thank you," he whispered, and the gorilla somehow seemed to understand, as it grunted softly in response before standing up and disappearing back into the density of the forest. Returning to the camp, Carlos carried with him not only photographs, but a story of unusual connection, a memory of that afternoon that he knew would forever change his perception of the natural world.